Last time we talked about pleasant, wonderful sides of reading the Bible. And more you will read it, more wonderful stories you will find there. For example, there are all kinds of amazing people you encounter in this long span of writing. One of my favorites, the person who is seldom mentioned for multiple reasons, is the first king of Israel. His name was Saul. He was an interesting fellow. First of all, he was extremely handsome and tall. Anybody else in Israel will be up to his shoulder. Could you imagine? He was a towering figure. But he was a very nice kid. You know, when we first encountered him, his father sent him to find some missing donkeys. Not a noble task. And he's wandering throughout, unknown territory with a servant looking for donkeys and couldn't find them. Well, instead of finding donkeys, he finds a great prophet, Samuel, who decides to anoint him and make him the king of Israel. So sometimes you go in some direction hoping to find donkeys and you become a king. So, but he is a very humble man. I mean, he immediately says, you couldn't possibly mean me. I'm from the smallest tribe in Israel. He belongs to a tribe of Benjamin, truly smallest tribe, started as a small tribe, and then they encountered some rather horrendous event in the book of Judges. You're too young to know, but it's there, you could find out. So they're greatly diminished, small tribe, and he's from the smallest family in the smallest tribe. So who is he to become the king of Israel? But yes, he does, and he does a splendid job, sort of establishes military in Israel. He starts the professional military in Israel. Sort of his idea that we're not just going to all run and grab weapons and fight, we're going to have special, mighty people who would, lead the defense. Here we come to a sad story, and his entire life, which is covered by the first book of Samuel, is a fairly tragic life. He is a rare example of a truly tragic figure in the Old Testament. Sort of, he means well, but all kind of terrible things happen to him. At the end, he dies on a battlefield committing suicide. Sort of, he would rather die than get into the hands of Philistines. So would I. But Philistinism is not a good thing. But he's prone to all kinds, what I would call clinical depression, fits of very dark mood. Things are not easy for him, even while he's the king. And it starts, there is a terrible event which sort of indicates his decline, which is right in the middle of the book of Samuel, and the event is extremely hard to understand. So, Prophet Samuel comes to Saul and says, you have to destroy the Amalek. And Amalek, there's some Bedouin tribe, not where Israel is, but someplace in the south. Right? And if you read the Bible, which again I assume you haven't, You would have encountered them even in the book of Exodus. It's a very early appearance of Amalek, the eternal enemy of Israel. But that was 500 years ago. 500 years ago, they attacked Israel after they left Egypt and were defeated. So 500 years passes, and the great prophet goes to the king, whom he anointed, and tells him that you are to destroy Amalekites. And you are, here come very, very hard words, you are to kill every man, woman, child, and suckling baby. No exceptions, every single one. That, by the way, is not all. And you are to kill every ox, and every sheep, and every donkey, and every camel. Everything. Everything which breathes has to be totally destroyed. We will talk shortly about sort of where it comes from. It's the term which is used, by the way, is term consecrated. You have to consecrate them, put them under a ban, consecrate. The Hebrew word is herem. Yes? Sort of, they all have to be consecrated to the Lord by total slaughter. And Saul obeys. He makes enormous effort to save allied tribes who live among the Amalek. Canaanites, a mysterious tribe, that he helps them save. And then he goes and kills every man, woman, and child, except the king, Agag, the king of Amalekites. He takes as a prisoner. After all, this is a fellow king. And we don't know what his plans are to do. Maybe he wants to sacrifice him later, but he does not kill the king. Every man, woman, child, suckling baby is killed. The king is alive. And then the troops say, well, let's not kill all the animals now, because some of these animals are really quite nice. So let's second-rate animals we will kill. The rest we will take with us and sacrifice to the Lord, to Yahweh. We will have this. And you say, what's the difference you're going to kill? There is a big difference. If you kill them there, they burn. If you sacrifice them, you get to eat them. And, the soldiers, and he is a good commander. He decides to listen to his soldiers because, after all, it's even greater, he thinks, a greater thing to do. He will kill them as a special sacrifice to the Lord, and of course that will fulfill the requirements. Well, it's hard to be the first king of Israel. The prophet Samuel comes and chastises him quite terribly. He says that, who are you? Lord anointed you and you don't listen. Saul attempts to explain. He says, look, we just wanted to do what is best. Samuel said, no, you're not supposed to do what is best. You have to follow exactly what you were told. You forfeit your kingship. So from that point on, Saul knows that in some sense his kingship, it takes a while, a long while. But right after that, Samuel secretly anoints another king, a pretender. David, you might have heard the name. So and Saul knows, he suspects that that's what is going on. But in any case, he is chastised, his kingship is taken away, but there is still this fellow, Agag, remember? The king. So Samuel says, bring him over. And there is a very difficult passage, the meaning of which in in Hebrew is not really clear, but one interpretation would be that Agag actually thinks he is reprieved. And the great religious figure calls him. No, no such thing is going to happen. No reprieve. Samuel takes a sword, and that we do understand quite clearly what Hebrew says. Hex him to pieces. Not just kills him, hex him to pieces. According to rabbinic commentaries, 4 pieces. That's later legends, they don't really know, but the Bible explicitly says hex him to pieces. Agag is dead. So here we're dealing with this terrible event, which is extremely hard to understand. The event of what we would now call genocide. Total extermination of a tribe, including suckling babes who cannot possibly sort of one thing, oh, but they would know the religion, not when they're sucking their mother's breast. So is it new? Is it unique? No. It is not a unique event. If we go to the books of the law, to the 5th book of Moses called Deuteronomy, it explicitly demands total extermination of certain tribes. In particular, 7 tribes which populate the land of Canaan are supposedly to be totally exterminated. No mercy are to be given. If the tribe lives far, if it's a war of conquest, say in Iran, then you just kill men. All men, whatever age. Women you could keep. If it's the local tribes, it's very clear. Total extermination. There are multiple things. There's explicit statements in multiple places. Sort of the notion of a total extermination does not appear once. You know, it's about 30 times, which one would think shows the consensus of multiple books. Sometimes, again, it's done somewhat gentler. In a case, there is a remarkably strange story in the book of Numbers, chapter 31, when Moses attacks Midianites. And lots of prisoners are taken. And Moses says, slaughter all the males, however young, and all women who are not virgins. Virgins you could have, which is, of course, raises an interesting question. How do you determine virgins? And you would say, Alex, you're getting too obscene. Well, the question was addressed quite carefully by the rabbis, who do tell us how. Apparently, according to one of the great interpreters, Rashi, the high priest has a plate on his head, a gold plate, which is holy to the Lord. And when they passed women in front of the high priest, Aaron at that point, the plate will project some light, I guess, which will turn non-virgins green. So I'm just reporting what they say. So people who turn green were immediately slaughtered. This is a unique event. Typically, harem requires total destruction, typically including all animals, anything which breathes. There is an exception. You are not to cut trees. Trees are accepted. They do not breathe. So again, this is... What do we do with this? First of all, why are we talking about it? Are we trying to find some evil about Jews? Well, interestingly enough, let's ignore Jews from this point on. Whether they believe that or not, it's up to modern rabbis. I will say good things about modern rabbis just in a few minutes. But let's ignore that. But these stories have been formative for the other side, for other people who read the Bible. It's not just Jews who read the Bible. You might have heard of Christians who read the Bible. And they took these stories very seriously. You say, oh, they were Middle Ages. They didn't know anything. I wish, by the way, in Middle Ages, while it did happen occasionally, and rather brutal things, it was not as bad as in some country in the north of the American continent, United States of America. You might have heard of pilgrims. And you, of course, read, some of you, like people like Michael, were taught that when pilgrims came, they invited Indians, and they had Thanksgiving, and they shared a turkey with sweet potatoes. That's a very nice story. And all nice stories have to be appreciated and remembered. Sadly enough, it's not what happened. When pilgrims came, this land was actually taken. There were people living there. And some of these people didn't want to give the land away. They wanted to defend themselves. Strange idea. You might have heard, some of you might have heard of a tribe called Pequots. Oh, they didn't cover them at school. Well, that was a very important event because it was very early on. This tribe Pequots, who lived in southern Connecticut, didn't want to move, and they defended themselves. So somewhere around 1636, very early on, there was a major expedition to a fort standing next to a Mystic River. Those of you from Connecticut would know such river. And the pilgrim troops, mostly from Massachusetts, they were coming down, decided that these were Amalekites. Clearly, they were the enemy, which needed to be totally exterminated. So 700 sources vary. 700, some sources say 600. 700 old men, the young men were fighting the war. Old men, women, children, suckling babes were burned alive. This is history. This is not something which was invented. It was universally claimed that it was the right thing to do because they were Amalekites. The text was taken and applied to the specific reality. Well, 17th century, what did they know? Throughout American experience with Native Americans, well into the 19th century, the parallel stood. They were Amalekites. There are sermons published in the middle of 19th century saying they are Amalekites, they are to be exterminated. Books are important. Some modern biblical commentators say, well, but it really didn't happen in the Bible. There is no archaeological evidence that Jews ever did that. Well, actually, there is no archaeological evidence about Jews at that time at all. But there is indeed no archaeological evidence. But it does not matter. People don't do what happened. People do and imitate what is written. The idea of fighting Amalekites becomes a powerful idea which goes on for millennia. The idea of exterminating the tribes, exterminating inferior people, exterminating the people of a wrong religion is still with us. We often hear nowadays the story about jihad. But the rules of jihad are nowhere as cruel as what the Bible prescribes. So we have to figure out what to do with this text. And you say, oh, well, let theologians do that. You couldn't leave it to theologians. This affects every single person on this planet, because these are texts which affect things. And you say, well, people do not believe. Amazingly enough, you find people who do not believe in God, but still take this text very seriously, because the idea of extermination of some other tribe apparently is quite appealing. You don't have to be a deeply religious person. So the question appeared long time ago. I mean, the first person who seriously said, well, I mean, we cannot really deal with this book, was a Christian theologian by the name of Marcion, who was born somewhere at the end of the 1st century, died somewhere in the 60s or 70s of the 2nd century. So he read the Old Testament and said, we cannot keep this book. This is just cannot be done. This describes, according to him, a totally different God. There is a God of Jesus Christ. And then there is this tribal evil God of the Jews. This book needs to be eliminated. Or at least Christians shouldn't. I mean, Jews could read it, but Christians should not be reading this thing. And it was a difficult choice. The Christian church had to address this issue. I mean, do you keep this book, which demands rather unkind things? Basically, universal decision, which was sort of made. Marcion was, I mean, interestingly enough, he knows where the center of the church is. It's in Rome. So he goes to Rome, and what do you do if you want to get a positive decision from papacy? You guys don't know. I'm a Catholic, I do know. You make a large contribution. So he makes a very large contribution. He gives the church a huge sum of money to give to the poor. And he basically says, and by the way, that's my agenda. I'm very proud to say, I mean, that at least in the 2nd century, papacy was strong enough to basically return the money. They did return the money, and his agenda failed. But the problem was not eliminated. We will look later in the course great work of Christian theologians who basically had to say, yes, this is an inspired text, but it doesn't mean what it says that it means. That basically you have to view the text in light of, you see, we will be talking about Christianity, just one lecture, Christianity is not the religion of the book, not like Judaism. It venerates the scripture, but I mean the primary focus is on a person of Jesus Christ. So you have to understand the scripture in light of Jesus Christ. And as we shall see, it's very clear if you start using this criteria. So what do you do with these things? You have to find symbolic meaning. So there's the 7 tribes you have to exterminate when you enter the promised land. What does it mean? You have to fight 7 deadly sins. That's what it means. It has nothing to do with killing. Well, later on, obviously people will decide, especially after the Reformation, especially Anglo-Saxons, will decide that you don't have to explain Old Testament symbolically. And they start following certain Old Testament commandment and exterminate Amalek. But the problem actually remains. And time again, well into the 20th century, the problem remained. The great German theologian, probably the greatest German theologian at the turn of the 20th century, was Adolf Harnack. And he actually proposed, let's get rid of the Old Testament. I mean, it's just, we cannot keep it. We're too mature now, we're too sophisticated to go for this symbolic interpretation. We have to understand this stuff is just awful, and let's throw it away. Again, the sort of even Protestant church in Germany during the worst times of Hitler didn't quite do it. There were some German Lutheran theologians who attempted to sort of explain Judaism away, but they failed. Sort of, I'm happy to say for my Lutheran friends, many of them became martyrs, sort of defending the Jews and Old Testament. Pope Pius XI, it's very fashionable right now to explain that popes were helping Hitler to exterminate the Jews. Pope Pius XI said that we're all spiritual Semites. The year was 1937. It was not fashionable to be spiritual Semites. So, you know, the people attempted, but the problem still remains. Sort of till today, we have to deal that Bible is a complicated text, extremely complicated text, which contains extremely violent passages, and passages which on the surface at least, their primary meaning violate what is natural law. Remember, there is this old thing we encountered when we talked about Socrates. Do you have a right to do evil ever? And Socrates' answer was no, no matter what. And the question which needs to be decided, I'm sorry to bring theology into the thing, but this is theology which affects lives of millions. Is it ever possible for religion to demand evil? Is it possible for God to do wrong? Oh, he's omnipotent. Could he order slaughter of innocents? Well, again, the opinions differ, but I'm very firmly convinced no. There are certain things God cannot do. You say, but it means that he is not omnipotent. No, it doesn't mean anything of the kind. Things like God cannot create a round square. He cannot. Does it violate his omnipotence? No. It just shows that round square is an impossibility. The command from omnipotent God to slaughter innocents is impossible. It is a round square. We have to, and this has to once and for all be accepted again. Right now we have these civilization wars. I hope they will all could come up to this fundamental thing that no matter what, killing innocents, killing children, whatever the goal, is unacceptable. Direct slaughter of an innocent child, even if you save your country, cannot be accepted. It's totally outside of what is permissible. You say, well, but we don't do that. Well, we do that. One of the most gruesome parts of American history is, of course, bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yes, there was a legitimate war. Yes, United States was attacked. Yes, fighting Japanese was totally, I'm not a pacifist. I'm not trying to say that fighting a war is bad. But picking 2 cities with no military target, that was done on purpose, with basically only civilian population. And the reason it was done, they were not bombed. Why they were not bombed? I mean, Japan was bombed throughout. There were no military targets there. And it would clearly demonstrate precisely this, if you like, virgin state of these 2 cities would show the power of this new weapon. And President Truman, whom in many respects I like very much, in many respects, ordered a slaughter of innocent civilians. Again, there is this modern idea that there are no innocents, that they're working in factories, that they're growing rice. This is not true. Civilians are civilians. Don't believe that. When Clinton orders bombing of a television station in Belgrade, he's a war criminal. There's no question about it. These are civilian targets. The fact that you don't like this television doesn't make it a military target. I don't like Fox News. Let me go on record. But I would say that any attempt to bomb Fox television, Fox News television, is a terrorist act. They have to be protected. We do bomb, as this country, United States, we do bomb civilian targets. Not in the distant past. The bombing of television station in Belgrade happened in my memory. Probably most of you were around. I'm not trying to say that Serbian government was good. I'm trying to say that television journalists are civilian targets. They're not to be killed. They're not quite like killing innocent babies, but you know, there are certain absolute norms. And we have to discuss, I mean, the reason I'm bringing it all up, things do connect. Because the moment you say it is legitimate to attack Amalek, it becomes legitimate to attack Serbia, because Amalek is everywhere. By the way, there's no record of Amalekites. There's no historic record of Amalekites anyplace. They're only mentioned in the Bible. There's no archaeological reference. Amalekites is this evil which, you know, we are to fight. Now I promise to say something very nice about rabbis. Let me do. There is at least one group of rabbis, many more than just them, but one of the most orthodox group of rabbis are Hasidic rabbis belonging to Lubavitcher, the Chabad. There's this organization. They're very, very traditional, at least as much as Hasids could be. And the wonderful thing about it, that they constantly say that we have to fight Amalek. But then they add one more thing. They say Amalek is in sight. That Amalek is not something. It's not these Palestinians. They're not Iranians. They're inside us. This is this voice, cynical voice inside us, which does not allow us to be really good. And they say, and I second them, all of us have this inner cynical Amalek. And fighting him to the death, total extermination, is a good thing. You say, well, but Muslims don't believe that. Well, you will be very, very wrong. Because when I talk to my Muslim friends, it's actually good to talk to, Jews, Muslims, even Christians. You might learn something about them. So when I talk to my Muslim friends, they tell me, jihad is very important. For us, it's the center of our faith. But the jihad is the inner struggle against evil in me. That's what I heard from my Muslim friends. You say, oh, you cannot believe them. Well, I can believe them. I believe the Jews. I believe Muslims. I even believe Christians. So it is inner struggle. And it is extremely dangerous. But you say, there are Muslims who turn this struggle into external struggle. Oh, yes. And there are Jews now who turn this struggle into external struggle. Sometimes to rather comical things. There was like a few months ago, if I remember correctly, one of the chief rabbinical authorities, you might not understand the thing, but in Israel there are two kinds of observant Jews. One kind wears black kippahs. Another one which wears colored kippahs. Sort of the colored people are more involved with the government. They're prepared to serve in the army. In any case, a high rabbinical authority of the black kippah Jews said that the other guys were Amalek. I think he was wrong. I'm not saying that he was Amalek, but I think he was wrong. I think it was rather unfortunate that the term Amalek, the term of a tribe which needs to be exterminated, was used in a public discourse in Israel. I think it's terrible when we attach this label to any group, whatever it is. And it's very tempting. It has been done. I mean, I see it in, there is no country. Well, I have a friend who says, no, not in Denmark. But I don't even agree with him. I think even in Denmark, it is a terrible temptation to externalize evil, to see it, well, as something you have to go fight and kill. So when we deal with the Bible, we have to remember two things. First of all, it is probably the most important book in our civilization. So if you don't know it, you will never figure out where you are. Maybe you don't want to. That's a very legitimate thing. You have to read the Bible. You have to remember that it's a very difficult book. It's probably the most difficult book there is, because there are multiple layers written by different people in different ages. So if you attempt to read it again, I shouldn't externalize evil, but I would say fundamentalist attitude to reading the Bible is extremely dangerous. If you give this book to a person with college education and say, go figure out what it says, apply it as a proof text for your you have a problem, you open, find what it says and do. Terrible things will happen. By the way, I do believe, personally, that is an inspired text. However, I equally believe it's an extremely dangerous book and could be used, and has been used to great harm. So this is the why it is a very difficult thing. I mean, I have to talk about terrible evil in the book, which you know, I think is the most important book. But the evil which, you know, I told you about is there. And these are not, by the way, these are not the only passages. Which, I mean, it is a complicated book. And if you attempt to just use it blindly, terrible things might happen. So the title of this lecture is The Holy War.